do you see here when you look at this very, very sad story? Because a 22-year-old who really wasn't a suspect at all has lost his life, an unarmed black man just driving a car. But what do you make of the implications and the repercussions of this story, which are many, aren't they?
Well, many police officers have taken to social media today to express their anger at the fact that the officer has been named, and the Metropolitan Police Federation, who are representing PC Blake, have also expressed their disquiet through a statement today. However, they've got it wrong. Of course, anybody charged with a criminal offence should be named. That's a very important tenet and structure of British justice.
Is there much precedent for police officers not being named if they are charged with this particular offence?
No, there isn't. No. And I'm old enough to remember Dougie Lovelock being charged with shooting Cherry Gross, police officers being charged with shooting Stephen Waldorf in Kensington back in the 80s. And more recently...
de Menezes, I remember that one.
Jean-Charles de Menezes, yeah. And more recently, Tony Long stood trial for shooting dead Azelle Rodney. Tony Long was charged with murder and he was duly acquitted, albeit the process was long and arduous. And that is a lot that the Met Police Federation are complaining about. It's the process. Because hindsight engineers from the IOPC have months and years sometimes to pore over the evidence, where, of course, this officer probably made his decision in a very short split second.
So tell me what they're looking for. When they go over the evidence with a fine-tooth comb over months and years, what are they looking for? They're looking to ascertain that there was reasonable reason for the shooting, that the officer felt or thought or believed something. What?
Well, the officer, of course, will not have to prove anything at the Old Bailey. It will be for the prosecution to prove his guilt to a charge of murder. And to convict somebody of murder, you have to prove intent, criminal intent to kill someone. I don't want to go any deeper into the evidence now because, of course, I think that would be somewhat irresponsible. But they're the broad points that the prosecution will have to prove. I think the legal process is going to be tested. It wouldn't surprise me if the trial date that's now fixed gets put back, because there are going to be many, many procedural discussions about the whole procedure that will be tested.
Why is it so complicated?
By lawyers.
What's so procedural about it?
Well, because, of course, you have, not only do you have the Independent Office of Police Conduct who have conducted the investigation, but then it gets referred to the CPS for their charging procedures. And I suspect that throughout this, the defence are looking to see if every I has been dotted and every T has been crossed in terms of proper procedure. I'm glad that the judge, whilst naming this officer today, gave them some notice of this, because PC Blake will have been allowed to remove his online footprint, for example, and remove themselves from the voters' register. So, in essence, should be, hopefully, if that's all been done properly, impossible to find.
Okay.
But, of course...
What would be the sorts of things, and either of you can answer this, or both of you even, what would be the sorts of things, so I'm not discussing this case particularly, but a case where a police officer has shot and killed somebody, that would indicate that the police officer might be guilty of murder rather than just doing his or her job? What are the sorts of factors or features that we might be looking for?
Well, I sat through the public inquiry into Tony Long's shooting dead of Azelle Rodney, not the criminal trial, but the public inquiry. And the inference that was raised, both at that and the trial, was that Tony Long had a mindset that he was going out there to kill Azelle Rodney no matter what. And of course, Tony Long's defence was completely kind of dismantled that in saying that he acted according to the events that unfolded in front of him in a very short space of time. And the jury, of course, agreed with PC Long, and he was duly acquitted. It will be very interesting to see how this trial pans
I'd be
out.
fascinated to know how, Ollie, a barrister sets up a notion in court of what's in somebody's mind when they set out to do something. Because if the person's standing there in court and saying, well, that isn't what I was thinking at all, that wasn't what I was doing whatsoever. Actually, I was very worried about my mother's health. Actually, I was thinking about the fact that I had a nail stuck in my shoe and it was really painful at the time. And then I suddenly looked up and I saw this. How is anyone in court going to prove that that isn't true? How do you prove mindset?
Well, that's the difficulty in a lot of these cases, because whenever it comes to a criminal charge, what the police are looking for is means, motive, opportunity. Now, they can usually prove that they had the means to do it, because that would be whether they had a weapon or whatever they had that was potentially used to kill somebody. The opportunity, were they there at the time? But the motive becomes very difficult, especially if this involves somebody that has never met somebody before, a serving police officer that's come across a member of the public. But it's a difficult thing usually, and you see this all the time in America, where police officers are taken through the legal system and a jury will find them innocent because it is so difficult to get that motive in black and white beyond the reasonable doubt that is needed in a...
So let me ask you about the 300 firearms officers who said, you know something, if this is going ahead, we don't want it. It just makes life impossible. I don't think we want this job. It's too much. What's going on there? Yeah,
and many of them have made that decision a permanent one, and they're not returning to firearms duties. Mm-hmm. And there's been recent reports that the Met are struggling to recruit their replacements. There was a huge outpouring of anger, and I didn't agree with the officers handing down their weapons instantaneously. Mm-hmm. I think they are well-respected and reasonably paid public servants who are there to protect. If you decide that that job is not for you, then on behalf of the public, give all due notice and then withdraw from that role. But they will get the candidates to fill the role. It is a very demanding role. They are incredibly highly trained, and there are different levels of firearms officers. The ones that patrol the streets 24/7 in the armed vehicles, they have a slightly lesser training from the next ones up that are specialists, and then sitting at the top of the tree are the counter-terrorism specialist firearms officers who have to be astonishingly fit, are remarkably well trained, and are, of course, or will be, called upon us to pull the trigger when most of us would want to run the other way.